Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today we're going to be speaking with Kelly Cunningham. She is from Your Leasing Co. Kelly helps small businesses to be able to negotiate leases. Now, the reason that I wanted to share this with you is because lots of people, when they're signing up for a lease, don't know what they're signing and are not informed of the decisions that they're making. So Kelly has been running this business for nearly 20 years and been doing this for over 25 years. And the reason that I wanted to share this is because this is something that happened to me where I rented a space, subcontracted back in the day to a chiropractic clinic. And then I rented just a room from a physio. And then I moved into my commercial space. And as somebody who'd always rented in a residential lease, I didn't understand that there was so many things that I could actually negotiate. So I just signed a lease, all the stipulations that my landlord had given me. I just assumed. I didn't get any legal advice. I certainly didn't use a company like Your Leasing Co. And unfortunately, what that meant was there were lots of things that I possibly could have negotiated in order to save money, in order to be able to make my business run even better. And so what Kelly does is help businesses be able to know what they can and can't negotiate on, because she's literally done it with hundreds and thousands of different businesses over the last 25 years. So this is super important. If you're ready to go to the next level and you're looking at how you can grow your impact and you want to be able to, you're thinking of leasing a space, or you're thinking of maybe you're coming up to the end of your lease and you're looking at how you want to renegotiate, then there's some amazing gold in this interview for you. Kelly is a highly skilled commercial property consultant and tenant representation expert who brings over 25 years of industry experience. Kelly's a licensed real estate agent and has a broad background in retail and commercial leasing, management of super regional shopping centre assets, and specialization in retail and commercial leasing. She's well regarded for her expertise in negotiating leases and getting the absolute best results for her clients. She's consulted with legal firms in the capacity of expert witnesses, and literally this woman has just been doing this stuff for such a long time. So what it means is that she's super informed, and when she helps people be able to negotiate their leases, she's doing it from a place of authority to really be able to help people get the best deal in their lease. So I'm really excited about this interview, and I trust that if you're going to the next level, that this is unbelievably helpful for you in your business and help you to be able to save money in your lease. Hi, Kelly, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, how are you?
It's great to have you on. I would love it if you could share a little bit about who is Your Leasing Co. What do you guys do?
Sure. Well, Your Leasing Co. has been set up with a view to representing commercial tenants and helping them with their lease negotiations. I mean, our objective is to increase profit of businesses by giving them better terms, helping them get better rent, better incentives and those kinds of things, and to ease that power imbalance that happens between landlords and tenants. There's always these kind of David and Goliath conversations that happen where the landlord's so powerful and then there's the tenant who doesn't have information, they don't have the experience, they don't have the knowledge, and they get bulldozed by landlords and often sign things without actually understanding what they've signed because they feel so much pressure and, oh my goodness, I have to sign. He's telling me it's normal. I don't know if it's normal. What do I do? So we come in and go, you know what, we can take all of that away from you. We can help you do it. We've negotiated, 1,000 leases. We're doing it for 25 years. Let us help you and we'll make sure you've got the best deal you can, and you don't need to worry about it. You can have some sleep back too if it's losing sleep, causing you to lose sleep. It's just really our service to help you make sure you get the best possible deal you can on your lease and increase your profit. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
When I read about your services, I was really excited because it's something that I had heard about before in business networking circles. And then my person retired and I've not heard about it since. And I'm like, how is it possible that I know that there are mistakes people make and I know that we can help them, but I've got no one to refer to or no one to actually speak to about this. So I'm super excited about this interview today. What are some of the common mistakes people make when they're either signing a lease or in a lease?
Well, the first most common mistake, I guess, is the rental people pay, right? I just actually put an article up about this. I was just thinking of doing that tomorrow, an article on how to determine the rent, because one of the things that people make the mistake of is not understanding that they need to be figuring out what the market rent is for their tenancy. So the landlord comes to them and says, okay, you're currently paying $50,000. I want you to sign a new lease and the new rent's $55,000. And then the tenant uses that $55,000 as the starting point for their negotiation. When the landlords come up with that number for a variety of other reasons, might be because that's how much they need to pay their own mortgage. It might be because they just feel like a 10% increase sounds good. Like, it's not always related to what the actual market value of this tenancy is. So the first thing you need to do when you're doing any kind of lease negotiation is understand what the market rent is. And how you can do that is by looking around at comparable tenancies, similar locations, similar sizes, and see how much they're renting for, or talk to the local agents and say, have you leased anything of this size recently and how much did you lease it for? And understand what recent activity is going on. And that tells you what the market rent is, because that's where you should be starting your negotiation, not where the landlord asks you to start, because you're paying 50, the landlord's asking 55, you think that's the starting point, but what if the market rent's 40 grand? So you think you've got to win because you've saved $2,000 and you're down to 53. That's great, but the market's 40. It should have been, you should have got 45. So the main the main point there is think about the market rent rather than the landlord's asking rent. The landlord's asking rent is interesting, but it doesn't necessarily have any relevance to the market rent and how much you should be paying. So that's the first thing that people do, which I find is probably the most common mistake. The second thing I would talk about would be rent reviews. It's very easy to kind of dismiss the impact of the rent review per annum because the impact is compounded. If you agree to a CPI rent review, for example, at the moment CPI is sitting at 6, 7, 8% in some states. So that means your rent's going to go up by CPI 6%, 7%, 8% per annum. CPI used to be 2 or 3% and it was really lovely and everyone agreed to that and it was fine. It's not like that anymore, so don't agree to CPI. You know, some landlords ask for CPI plus 2%, for example. So if you've got CPI plus 2%, that might result in a 10% rent increase, which is too much. The business can't sustain that. So looking for a rent review that's like 3%, 3.5%, 4%, that's what you're looking for. And that also helps you as a business with your cash flow management because obviously you know exactly how much rent you're going to be paying in year 3, year 4, year 5. And that's one of the biggest mistakes people make is leaving it up to CPI because it's okay, it's moving with, the market and inflation and those kinds of things. That sounds good, but in reality, it means a very big increase for you. So try and avoid that if you can. The other thing is when you've got an option on your lease, make sure you start talking about it 6 months before it expires because you run out of time. And the most valuable tool in any negotiation is time. If you wait till it's almost up and the landlord knows, okay, they're not sure if they're going to renew, the landlord will just go quiet. They'll just wait. And their strategy is to wait it out because sooner or later you'll panic and sign a new lease. So if you're 3 to 6 months out from your expiry or for the option term, you need to be saying to the landlord, hey, listen, I've got a lease expiry coming up. What are your expectations in regards to the new lease? And they'll tell you, look, we want the 55 grand. And we go, okay, thanks very much. That's interesting. Leave it with me. I'll come back to you. Then you go away and work out what it is that you think the market rent is and you can start your negotiation. And if you've started early enough, it means that you've given yourself time to do that negotiation. And you can afford to wait for a response from the landlord. You'll write to them and say, hey, we want to pay 40 grand. The landlord, and you'll go back and forth with the landlord will respond to you and you'll go back and forth and you can sit and wait for 2 weeks if you want because you've got time. Whereas if you start that negotiation a month out, there's no time. By the time you've done your homework, you've got 2 weeks left and it's like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? I need to sign because otherwise I've lost the option that I've got. So one of the key things is people leave it too late. They think, oh, that's ages away. I don't need to worry about that. That's April next year. Well, you know what? I'm here to tell you, if your lease expires in April or May next year, that you should be talking about it now with your landlord. Talking about it soon is there's no harm in that. And the other thing I see a lot of is personal guarantees on leases. So if you are a business who's got a proprietary limited company as the tenant, ABC Proprietary Limited, then the landlord will often say to you, look, you need to provide a personal guarantee or a director's guarantee, which means that as the director of that company that you're personally liable for that lease if for whatever reason something changes and you disappear or you owe money or something happens. And landlords are very good at saying, oh, that's really normal. That happens on every lease. Again, I'm here to tell you that's not true. They don't happen on every lease. They happen on some leases. but not on all leases, and you can negotiate that out. So that's something that you can say to the landlord, no, I'm not providing a personal guarantee. If the lease is in a company name and you don't have a personal guarantee, that means that if something changes along the way and you need to hop out of the lease or you need to change something, then you've only got an exposure of any cash guarantee you've given the landlord, and you don't have to worry about the landlord knocking on your door in 2 years' time and saying, hey, remember me? You owe me 25 grand. I'm here to collect. You don't need to worry about that. And that's because that can be quite stressful, because if you're closing a business or your circumstances have changed where something means that you can't continue the lease, you're already in a world of pain for whatever reason. The last thing you need is the stress of thinking, goodness, is the landlord going to come back to me and ask me for that money later, and that kind of thing. So personal guarantees are definitely negotiable, something that you shouldn't blindly sign. And look, if your lease is in your own personal name, then it means sometimes they'll put it's the lease is in the name of Kelly Cunningham, and then they'll put personal guarantees not applicable. That doesn't mean that you don't have a personal guarantee. That means you're automatically a personal guarantor because the lease is in your name, right? So be clear about if you can use a proprietary limited company with no personal guarantees, that's ideal. But if the lease is in your own personal name, that you are personally liable for that. So you need to be clear about that and chatting to your accountant and making sure that's the right structure for you, because it's, there are obviously tax implications for companies and individuals and sole traders and things like that. So you've got to work out what's right for you, but do consider the lease when you are making those decisions, because there are ramifications from a leasing perspective on that structure. And look, the last thing I'd probably talk about as a mistake, or something that people don't, not necessarily a mistake, but things that people don't think about when they're negotiating their lease, which they should, is what's going to happen at the end of the tenancy. What's the make good requirement at the end of the lease? Because at some point you're going to leave these premises. Hopefully it's not going to be soon. When you enter a lease, you generally, everything's great, everything's perfect, and it's going to be great forever, and, nothing's ever going to change and you're going to stay there. So often people think, I don't need to worry about the make good or, what's going to happen at the end, because that's miles away. You really need to think about it now, because the landlord's also not thinking about it now, because they also think it's miles away and you don't need to worry about it. So you're more likely to get favourable terms now at the beginning than you are down the track. So you should be trying to negotiate to say, at the end of the lease, I'm going to take my loose fixtures and fittings. I'm going to make good any damage that I cause when I take those things out, and I'm going to paint the tenancy white, and that's it. Right, some leases will say to you, you've got to take it back to a bare shell, which means you've got to take it back to a completely empty, unimproved space, no ceiling, sometimes no shop front, no flooring. You've got to take all the services back to the initial position. That can be really, really expensive. And it's not something, when you're closing a premises or moving or whatever, you don't need costs when you're exiting, right? It might cost 20 or 30 grand, and all of a sudden that's, if you're closing your business, that's the last thing you need. Right, so at the beginning, when you're negotiating the lease, you just say to the landlord, look, the make good requirements are remove loose fixtures and fittings, I'll make good any damage I cause, and I'll paint it white. They go, yep, that's great. And so then it's locked in, right? So when the time comes, you just do that, and you don't have to worry about having to try and negotiate at the time, because once you're already at the end of the lease, if you're then trying to negotiate it, you've got no power in that negotiation. The landlord's going, well, it's in the lease, you have to take everything out. And because sometimes what happens is people say to me, but I know the landlord, and, they're really good, and, they'll be fine. And you know what, that's great. But what if the landlord dies, sells the asset, has a property manager who's a different view? Some of those things happen along the course of the 5 years of the lease. You've got to make sure you've got the stuff in writing, and making sure that you're protecting yourself, number one, and not relying on a handshake arrangement, because things change along the way, and we see it all the time when they sell assets and then the new person comes on board and is going by the letter of that lease, because that's what's the only thing they've got to rely on. So that's what they rely on, and all of a sudden you come unstuck. So those are probably the 5 most common sort of mistakes, I guess, or the things that people need to be most mindful of when they're negotiating a lease. Yeah.
When I first, I had a rental clinic that I just rented a room and it was really cheap and it was great. And then I moved into a commercial space, not knowing any of this stuff, only been a residential tenant, which is to say you fight like tooth and nail to get a rental property where I'm from. And then you don't get to negotiate anything. It's just you have to sign here, pay the bond, 4 weeks in advance, all that sort of stuff, pay your rent on time, great, and do some checks. And I remember learning and realizing that actually almost everything in a commercial lease is up for negotiation. Is that
Yes.
fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, most things are. I mean, there are some things that aren't negotiable because they are legislated, but most, and that varies from state to state, but in most cases, everything's negotiable. And you know what? Even if it isn't negotiable, I'd always have a crack at negotiating it anyway,
Yeah.
right? Because the art of negotiation is that you are going to, when you're going to the landlord with a negotiation, you are asking them for as many things as you can think of, right? We always have a list of about 15 things that we want to ask about, knowing that some of those things are things that they're not going to negotiate, aren't normally negotiable, and that they're going to have to say no, and we're going to have to say, oh, okay then, all right, we'll concede that, right? Because the art of negotiation is that the landlord needs to feel like they've had a win. We obviously need to feel like we've had a win. So we need to include a whole bunch of things that we're happy to give away, or that we're not, we're not actually concerned about whether it gets negotiated or not. But everything can be negotiated. You can say, I want to negotiate the security deposit. You want 3 months? I always only offer 2 months, right? Okay. I don't want to do a personal guarantee. I do want the 3% review. I do want 3 car parks included. I do want additional signage. I do want a make good that says I have to only, take my personal belongings. That's it, right? Every single thing. And you know what? If you present it in a way that's friendly, you're trying to have a conversation with the landlord. The key is to not be hostile with them, right? Because you are going to be in a relationship with them for the next 3, 4, 5 years, whatever. So presenting it in a way that helps them say, hey, look, here's all the things that I'd love to have. I know that these things are not all going to be perfect for you. So let's have a conversation and figure out something that's going to be mutually acceptable to us. And we're, motivated to work with you to come up with that solution. But ask for everything, because why not? You just don't know what the position of the landlord is and where they're at with the age and stage of their asset. I mean, if they're looking to sell, they'll behave in a certain way. If they've just bought the asset, equally, they'll behave in a different way. If it's just a, sit and hold type thing, it's in their super fund, then they'll behave in another way, right? So you don't know what that is. So if you can establish that, that's good, because we know as leasing, experts, when we know that information, we will negotiate in a different way because we know what's important to them. But if you don't know that information, you can just ask for everything, stay friendly, stay calm, and then figure it out. And they will present those solutions to you and go, look, we can't possibly do that because we're selling the asset and we need the valuation to keep at that rental or whatever it is. And then you can work with that. But my answer to that is yes, everything is negotiable. And when people say, oh, we never negotiate that, okay, well, we're here to ask you whether you will negotiate on this occasion, right? Because and that's why we're in business, right? Because there are landlords who are very dominant in these discussions, and they will say things to you like, oh my goodness, everyone provides a personal guarantee. And as a tenant who's never done this before, or someone who's only done it a handful of times, it's very difficult for you to say with authority or confidence, well, that's not true, because you actually don't know. You haven't got the terms of reference to be able, whereas I can sit there and go, that's not true. We haven't done a personal guarantee for the last 15 deals we've done. And I can say that because I know it to be a fact.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of trying to negotiate the things you can and trying to sort of see where they are being a bit, creative in their responses.
What I've been doing with my landlord, saying to him, hey, I want 6 weeks free for the first 6 weeks. And he looked at me like I had 3 heads. Like he was not coming to the party at all. Like he had never been asked that question in the history of ever. And my girlfriend had opened up a shop in a brand new centre. So like you said, completely different landlords and different stage of landlord ownership. And she got 3 months free rent for the first 3 months and help with fit out. And I was like, well, hey, I'll give it a crack. And I ended up getting 4 weeks at half price. But I'm like, at least I had a go at negotiating something.
But you asked. That's the thing, you asked, right? And okay, he said, okay, and that's why we say, look, all of these things, and we know you're not going to agree to all of these things. But okay, I'm not going to get 6 weeks rent free, but I'm going to get 4 weeks at half price. Great. Well, that's a win. right? We'll take it, right? It all counts.
Definitely, yeah. So if lots of things are up for negotiation when you're starting a lease, it's good to know really good information. What about if you're in a lease? It sounds like time is very important. That was one thing that you mentioned before. Is there anything else? If someone's in a current lease that is kind of thinking, oh boy, what would you recommend?
So if you're in a current lease, I guess the main thing to be mindful of is just your communication with the landlord. Be honest with them, right? Don't be thinking, oh my goodness, I've got to, keep this from the landlord because if they find out, they might not renew my lease. Or if you're coming unstuck, if there's a problem, if you're having a challenging situation, be open and transparent with them, because what landlords hate is game playing by tenants, right? And if you withhold information, they know something else is going on and they don't like it. They think you're being dishonest with them. They won't help you, right? Because people work with people they like, and that applies to everything we do, right? So it's the same here. I mean, the landlord they aren't any different from you. They own the property, but they're the same as you. They're a small business too often. So they want to make sure that they want you to stay, because if you leave, that's a problem for them. So if you've got something's cropped up during the lease and you're like going, listen, I've got a bit of a challenge because our supplier's done this, or we've got cinemas, for example, that we work for, they've got the writer's strike, it's causing them dramas because they haven't got the content. We're working with the landlords. Keep being honest about it and showing your financials and saying, listen, this is the truth. This is the situation. Can you please help me? And keeping that communication line open. And because it also helps when you get to your renewal negotiation, because you've got a bit of a rapport with them, you've got a relationship, and there's more likely to be a positive outcome from that, because it's not, only talking to you every 5 years because that's when your lease is expiring. Make sure you pay your rent on time. If there's a problem in your tenancy, don't stop paying your rent, because that is the same as in a residential sense. I mean, it just doesn't help. And if you're breaching your lease by not paying your rent on time, then that can have ramifications down the track. And you may not think it matters at the moment, but it may matter in the future. Like if you decide, for example, you've been breaching your lease, you've been not paying on time, the landlord's been sending you a notice, hey, you're 7 days overdue, whatever. And then in 3 years' time, you decide you want to sell your business, then the landlord might say, listen, I'm not going to approve that assignment because you've had, I don't want to support that because you haven't been a good tenant to me. Or I want to exercise my option. The landlord's got the right to say, well, I'm not allowing you to have that option because you've had breaches of your lease during the term. So there are ways that the landlord, it can impact the landlord relationship later on. So the key is make sure you pay your rent on time. If there's a problem, talk to the landlord about it. Don't put your head in the sand and think it's going to go and just stop paying the rent, because they will get cranky with that really, really quickly. Mm-hmm. They need to know. If you know what, and most of them, if you've got a problem, just organise a payment plan. I mean, you go to them and say, hey, I know you've just sent me this thing at the end of the year to say my outgoings reconciliation's been done. I owe you $5,000. I can't pay that today. Can I pay it off over the next 3 months? Great. And then you make a plan, you stick to it. Then they don't have to call you again. I mean, what they hate is having to chase you. They hate it when they have to ring you and you don't take their calls because you're avoiding them. You think, oh my goodness, I don't want to talk to them. Yeah. That's not helpful. Yeah. So just keeping the communication open.
I think that's the case with almost any part of our business. When things get overwhelming, hard and ambiguous, we can either stick our head in the sand, don't want to do it, and avoid all of that stuff. I'm behind. I know that they're big. It's inflexible. What do? I can't help it. I'll just want to think about it. And you're right. As with anything, that open communication goes a long, long, long way. And I know certainly for us in business, as a business coach, when people get behind on their bills and things like that, the people that keep the communication open, this is what I can do, and they're consistent in taking that, it's so much easier to deal with because they're leaning in. It's like, I'm here, I've got a vested interest, and I'm taking responsibility for what I've said yes to.
Yes.
And I think that's a good strategy across all business, and especially obviously with, and I know for us, even if things got tight when we had the clinic, it was like wages, rent. Well, I was going to ask you a little bit about you. So why did you get into this? Like, how did you get into this kind of industry and doing this for the last 20 or 30 years?
So my background is shopping centre management. I started my career working in shopping centre management offices, managing very large shopping centres in Australia and New Zealand. And I spent a whole bunch of time doing that. But that's a 24/7 job, and it's great. There's a lot of learning, and it's like when you're managing a shopping centre, it's like managing 300 small businesses, right? Because you've got all these tenants and they all have their own needs and they all have their own things that they want. And so I enjoyed that, but I got to the point where I was like, you know what, the thing that I actually like the most out of all of this is the leasing and making a difference to the deal and trying to negotiate the best situation for both parties. And so it was at that point that I sort of saw a gap, and I left working in corporate, and I opened the practice in 2004. So since then, we've represented some landlords, which has been learning as well. But because of all that experience, it means that I know all the things that the landlords like, don't like, what the workarounds are, where the gaps are, and the things that they will negotiate and why. And because I've been on the other end of having to execute that as a shopping centre manager, where there's a lease in place and we have to make sure that each party performs that lease. So I decided, you know what, this is where I want to be. And I love making a difference, because what I'm doing is actually, it helps tenants. It saves money, it increases profit, and, it's all good news. And I get a big buzz out of that. We set a goal about 2 years ago that we were going to save $100 million for our clients by 2030. And we're 2 years in, and we're just touching 11 million. So we're really stoked. I mean, we just love, because it makes a difference. Like every dollar you save in your rent goes straight to the profit line of your business.
Yeah.
So it's really, it's a really nice way to do it. That's not going to impact anything else, right? Your wages stay the same, your sales stay the same. No one else even knows about it. But it's straight savings to your bottom line, straight increase to your profit. And in some cases during COVID, I mean, we saved businesses by doing it, because there are businesses around that just couldn't do it. And obviously during COVID, it was much more sensitive. Everyone was their emotions were heightened, and it was really tricky for people to communicate effectively because there was just so much pain. But having somebody help you do it just takes all that away, and we love it. I mean, I just love the satisfaction that I get from helping those businesses and the savings that we make. It's incredible. We have a big cheer every time we get a big result like that, and it's really satisfying. So that's why I do it.
If people are interested in wanting to know more about your services and what you do and how to engage with you guys, if they're looking at signing a lease or looking at re-signing and that sort of stuff, like what's the best way to kind of get in touch with you?
Well, they can hop onto our website, which is just yourleasingco.com.au. We have a 1300 number, which is 1300 356 702, which you can call and you'll get either myself or one of our team, and we'll answer your questions. Or you can hop onto the website and just fill in an inquiry form, send it through, and then we'll be in touch with you and talk about what you need.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Kelly, thank you so much for your time today. This is really, really helpful for so many practitioners that are at the next level and are looking to kind of grow and go to the next level. And we've seen people in a world of pain when this isn't done right. And we've seen people thrive when this is set up well. Just like everything else in your business, it's not necessarily set and forget, but it is, once it's negotiated, there's so much freedom and flexibility that you have in running your business, because you just know this is covered and sorted by people who know exactly what they're doing and been doing this the best part of 20 years. And
that's right.
So thank you so much for your expertise, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today. I really
No problem at all. No problem.